I have tested the new Polar Vantage V3 in the past few weeks. Just a few years ago, the choice for a new sports watch was basically just a choice between Garmin and Polar. However, other manufacturers such as Suunto and Coros have caught up, and even smartwatches such as the Apple Watch have become quite usable for sports. Meanwhile, Polar has somewhat lost ground and faced a few challenges during the last years. The Vantage V2 was introduced about 3 years ago, followed by the Grid X Pro about 2 years ago. In the last few years, only the Ignite 3 and the Pacer Pro were added, but neither of those convinced me in my tests. In other words, Polar has a lot of catching up to do. The Vantage V3 aims to close the gap to other watches and introduces several new interesting features. In this video we will discuss all of those new features as well as all of the pros and cons of this watch so that you know exactly whether it's a good choice for you as well. So let's get started. Design-wise, the Vantage V3 doesn't really differ much from its predecessor. It retains the same 5 buttons on the case edge, the buttons come with a slight texture and the button press feels comfortable, providing a good grip. Apart from the buttons, however, you can still control the watch via touch. The watch comes in just one version, so one size, which is priced at around $600. In this version it has a case diameter of 47mm and a thickness of 14.5mm. So it is as big as the Vantage V2 but slightly thicker. And this difference is definitely noticeable. The watch is almost as thick as the largest version of the Garmin Fenix 7 Pro, for example. However, it is made of aluminum, weighing just 57 grams, which is still pretty light and only slightly heavier than the V2. So although the case dimensions apart from the thickness remain more or less the same, the V3 has a significantly larger display now. This is a major difference from its predecessor. One thing that many Polar users, including myself, have criticized over the last years were the big display borders. So even though most Polar watches have big case sizes, it wasn't really used in most cases, so there was a lot of wasted space. With the Vantage V3, the display borders are noticeably narrower. The V2 had a 1.2-inch display, while the V3 features a 1.39-inch display. But even more importantly, the display technology differs. So Polar is known for creating sports watches, and sports watches for a long time were well known for having transflective MIP displays. For example, the Vantage V2 or the Grid X Pro used this technology as well. But now an increasing number of sports watch manufacturers use AMOLED displays, such as Garmin with its recent releases of the vivoactive 5, the Venue 3, the Forerunner 965 or the Epix watches. Polar introduced its first AMOLED watch with the Ignite 3 and now the Vantage V3 has it as well. AMOLED displays are significantly brighter, more colorful and have higher contrasts compared to MIP displays. So yeah, they're just much nicer to look at. And the drawbacks such as reduced battery lives are becoming less significant. More on that later. The resolution of the Vantage V2 was 240x240 pixels, whereas the V3 boasts 454x454 pixels. This is a night and day difference. The new display is significantly better than the previous one and is easily readable in all environments. With this resolution, the watch competes with Garmin's top displays found in the Forerunner 965 and Venue 3. The display offers a maximum brightness of around 1000 nits, which is very bright. A new feature is the ability to use the display as a flashlight. While not as advanced as the flashlight on the Garmin Fenix 7 Pro, for example, which has additional LED lights on the case, it is still useful for finding your way in a dark room. The Vantage V3's display is certainly very bright. For comparison, just the Apple Watch has a higher brightness, with the Ultra 2 reaching up to 3000 nits, but to be honest, you don't really notice this threefold brightness. So yeah, the display of the Vantage V3 is definitely very good. However, I'm not the biggest fan of the curved display glass as it tends to have more reflections in outdoor settings. Another aspect I didn't particularly like is the inability to adjust the time until the display turns off. So normally when you don't use the display dims and then it turns on again if you turn your wrist or if you touch the display, for example. So this applies for using the always on mode. Unfortunately, the time until the display dims or goes off completely without the always on mode cannot be adjusted, and in my opinion it turns off quite quickly, which on the other hand is of course good for battery life. However, during training you can use an additional always on mode where the display is consistently turned on and doesn't even dim. Because if you don't use that and want to use the maps for example, then you have to turn your wrist again and again, which can be a bit annoying. Using the always on mode, it really is always on, but at the same time it significantly affects the battery. However, if you're not planning to track a 12-hour activity or something like that, then it can definitely be a useful option, and it's amazing that Polar offers this option at all. What's also amazing is that for the wristbands you can now finally connect classic 22mm bands to the watch without adapters. I must also mention that the watch is now significantly faster, so this has been an issue with previous Polar watches, that they were a bit laggy and slow, which wasn't like a major issue, but it made the watches seem less modern. Now there's a new chip in use representing a significant leap from the Vantage V2, and I think it really shows, so the operation is much smoother, so kudos here as well. So all in all, I have a really good first impression of the Polar Vantage V3, but now it's time to take a deeper look into the watch. Let's move on to the second major innovation and something we haven't seen in any Polar watches in the past, and that's the new offline maps. And especially in terms of the navigation, this is something that Polar has fallen behind during the last years. With the Vantage V3 you now have topographic offline navigation maps. While you could use turn-by-turn navigation before, it was only possible when connected to a smartphone and topographic maps were not available at all. Polar has now introduced a much needed update. The watch's 32GB storage includes pre-installed maps of North America and Europe, and other regions can be downloaded for free via a computer. Unfortunately, however, you cannot use this space to store music on the watch. Navigation is handled through the Komoot app. You can load routes onto the watch and navigate using these topographic maps and traditional turn-by-turn directions. This is definitely very useful and a big upgrade to previous Polar watches, but the navigation features of the watch are still pretty much limited, similar to what I found on the Suunto race test. For example, you can use a back to start feature where your travel path is reconstructed, or you can navigate in a straight line back to the starting point, but you cannot create a new route directly on the watch. Therefore, you need to plan your routes in advance, load them onto the watch and then navigate based on those. You get turn-by-turn directions and everything you need to complete the route. So simply said, you just have topographic map pictures below your GPX track data, which works pretty well, but like I said, you can't create a new route on the watch itself. So if you ever get lost with the Polar Vantage V3, your only options are to retrace your exact path or to follow a straight line to the starting point. Additionally, if you're not following a specific preloaded route, the watch won't show your traveled path. So while the introduction of the topographic offline maps is definitely a positive development, Polar has still a lot of catching up to do, especially where we compare the navigation features of this watch to those higher end watches of Garmin, for example. And regarding the GPS, the watch now has multiband GPS, same as the Ignite 3, but unlike the Vantage V2. This technology has become a standard in other brands. Multiband GPS is generally more accurate than regular GPS. However, this wasn't the case with the Polar Ignite 3, which was unfortunately very inaccurate despite having multiband. But Polar promises improvement with the Vantage V3, so how accurate is the watch now? Here you can see my classic running route first, and here I first of all want to make sure that the watch's track doesn't, for example, lead through buildings. This has indeed happened in the past with some watches, including the Ignite 3. However, at first glance the Vantage V3 seems to be precise. No corners are cut, the route doesn't pass through buildings, and even when I've changed sides of the street, the watch seems to have recognized it well. However, we can only be certain after looking at my second test. In this test, I walk a path through the forest, attempting to cover the exact same route back and forth on a narrow trail. Thus, ideally the route recorded by the watch should consist of two precisely overlapping segments. I had already conducted the same test with the Polar Ignite 3, and here you see its route in blue and the Vantage V3's route in red. As we can see, the Vantage V3 is definitely more accurate, especially where it went deeper into the forest. For comparison, here are the results of the Garmin Fenix 7 Pro, the Apple Watch Ultra 2 and the Suunto Race. I think the Polar Vantage V3 fits in quite well here, so in my experience, the GPS accuracy has definitely improved. Now let's turn to something where Polar watches didn't need much improvement because it has always been one of the manufacturer's strengths: the sports, training and health features. First of all, there are some new sensors on the back of the case that perform various measurements. Polar combines all these under the term Elixir. So next to the classic heart rate monitoring, which we will discuss in detail shortly, the watch can also measure your blood oxygen saturation level, which can be particularly useful in higher altitudes. This value provides information on how the body is acclimatizing to the thinner air with altitude. For instance, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in September and our blood oxygen levels were measured daily. During my test the last weeks, I compared the Vantage V3 values with those from a finger pulse oximeter and they mostly matched very well. The watch can also measure skin temperature. This, along with blood oxygen saturation, is especially useful at night as it can help detect early signs of illness. Both watches provide crucial information about your health status. The sleep analysis is once again well executed, showing the duration of your sleep, time spent in various sleep phases and more. And similar to the Ignite 3, the watch has the Sleep Wise feature, helping you understand how sleep improves your attention and performance during the day. It essentially shows the energy boost your sleep gives you for the upcoming day, comparable to Garmin's body battery feature. The most notable addition to the new Elixir system is the ECG feature, however. The Vantage V3 can now record an electrocardiogram directly on the wrist. We already have this on the Apple Watch, some Fitbit models and the Garmin Venue 3 for example. And Polar now joins this group, which is very nice and useful of course, however there is a small catch. Polar explicitly mentions that this is not a medical device. So the other just mentioned ECG-capable devices had to go through long processes to obtain a license and are now official medical devices ensuring a certain level of accuracy. Polar currently doesn't have this license, however. So with the ECG feature on the Vantage V3, the watch can only calculate things like heart rate variability, and the RR intervals. It cannot detect arrhythmias or atrial fibrillation. So while the ECG feature is undoubtedly valuable, it cannot be compared to the watches just mentioned. However, the diversity and depth of the sports, fitness and health features of the watch are undoubtedly impressive once again. So unlike many smartwatches that only support you during workouts, the support extends beyond the classic training modes. The emphasis here is on the interplay of sports, fitness, recovery, sleep and more. The watch offers a seamless integration of various widgets, perfectly tailored to athletes and fitness enthusiasts. In training mode you have various modes, including a multisport mode for triathletes. During workouts you can display up to 8 data pages that are easily customizable through the app. Unfortunately, however, you can only display 4 data fields per page, while comparable watches from the competition offer 6 to sometimes even 8 data fields. Nevertheless, the watch provides almost every piece of data you might need. For example, advanced metrics like running performance can be measured directly on the wrist. And then outside the training mode there's the cardio load status. Here you can see if your current training is applying the right stress or if you're under or overloading your body. Additionally, you receive guidance on whether you're on the right track or what you can do better. There's also a widget with a training suggestion. It proposes a workout for the day based on your previous training, recovery, sleep and more. You can see how long you should ideally train today, including the intensity and heart rate zone, and sometimes it suggests strength or stretching exercises that you can perform directly under guidance on the watch. So overall, the watch provides an impressive amount of features, and this whole new Elixir measuring technology indicates very well in which direction Polar intends to go in the upcoming years, even though there is still a catch with the ECG feature not being a medical device as of now. Part of the new Elixir measurement system is also a new optical heart rate sensor with more LED lights and a different arrangement. Polar uses 3 green and 2 red LEDs here, which intends to capture various wavelengths. And in the past I actually achieved more accurate results with Polar watches than with Garmin watches, for example. However, during the last years, as I said, there weren't many new Polar watches coming out. But now the Vantage V3 comes in and has a new sensor, and of course Polar promises that it's the most accurate sensor so far. So is it really that accurate? Let's take a look at it. Here you can see the data from the Vantage V3 in blue in comparison with those from a chest strap in red for one of my running sessions, and there's little to complain about. The initial increase in heart rate, the minor fluctuations in between and the decrease in heart rate at the end are very well detected by the watch. The average heart rate, for example, deviates only by 0.27 beats per minute. For this session, the watch took a few seconds longer to detect the initial increase in heart rate, which is a typical phenomenon with optical heart rate sensors. However, overall the measurement is very accurate, with the average heart rate showing a deviation of less than 1 beat per minute as well. During running, I really had just positive experiences. The watch is very accurate. But let's talk about the much more interesting part now, which is strength training. I had quite high expectations here, but unfortunately they were not really met. What we can see here is unfortunately a common issue with optical heart rate sensors. The rapid changes in heart rate during activities like strength training simply couldn't be accurately recognized by the watch. While some increases in heart rate were well detected, others were not recognized at all. In my opinion, this result here is just way too inaccurate to rely on. And of course, this was not just an isolated case, I always test this with several sessions. Here, for example, we can see pretty well that the watch's curve is noticeably flatter than that of the chest strap because the watch doesn't quite keep up with rapid changes. As a result, the average heart rate here is also off by 17 beats per minute. Nearly all sports watches and smartwatches are inaccurate in strength training, and I have generally only achieved precise results with Apple Watches. The Polar Vantage V3 was super accurate for running, but for more challenging activities like strength training, the new sensor did not lead to improvements. Another important criterion for a sports watch is, of course, the battery life. And as mentioned earlier, AMOLED displays such as found on the Vantage V3 now consume much more energy than MIP displays. Watches like the Apple Watch or Samsung Galaxy Watch, for example, only last 1 to 2 days, which is at least partly due to exactly this display technology. One might therefore think that the battery life of the Vantage V3 is now significantly lower than that of the Vantage V2, which however is luckily not the case. So like I said, the watch has a new chip, which just works more efficiently, and also the battery itself has become more powerful. So the Vantage V2 had a battery with a capacity of 346 mAh, and the Vantage V3 has 488 mAh. On paper, this translates to a battery life increase in smartwatch mode from up to 7 days to up to 12 days, and in training mode from up to 40 hours to up to 61 hours. Additionally, there's the energy-saving training mode where Polar claims up to 140 hours, up from the previous 100 hours. However, these are just the figures provided by Polar, so how does the battery life hold up in real-world usage? During a run-hour running session, the watch consumes about 2% of its battery, which would result in approximately 50 hours of usage during training. I only see the whole numbers on the watch and no decimal places, but I believe we are at least in the range of the specified 60 run hours. On a day when I use the watch intensively alongside a run-hour training session including multiband usage, in my daily activities, like when I'm shooting a video for you for example, the watch consumes about 10%. The Vantage V3 lasts for approximately 9 to 10 days for me personally, which is truly remarkable for a watch with an AMOLED display. So all in all, what can we conclude about the new Polar Vantage V3? First and foremost, I think we can say the following. Ladies and gentlemen, Polar is back. Yes, with the Vantage V3, Polar arguably delivers its biggest update yet, providing a variety of admittedly long overdue innovations. The watch comes with tons of useful features, an even better battery life, a gorgeous AMOLED display, and most importantly offline maps and even a new ECG feature, although the latter 2 points still come with some catches. But the watch is definitely back in the competition. Especially in terms of training, health and fitness features, the watch can truly shine. The Polar algorithms and the entire interplay of individual measurements and the app are undoubtedly among the best on the market. The watch is aimed at fitness and health-oriented individuals or athletes who want the full range of features and measurements without any compromises. For this, it sacrifices fancy smart features or animations, for example. So Polar is definitely at least back in the game. Comparable watches from the competition include the Garmin Forerunner 965 and the Suunto Race. I'll probably make a comparison video between these two watches as well. Currently, I might still prefer these two watches over the Vantage V3. But I will tell you why in future videos, so if you don't want to miss these videos as well as many other videos coming up, you should definitely subscribe to this channel. If you found this video helpful or interesting, you could really support me and my work here by giving this video a quick thumbs up and let me know in the comment section down below what you think of the new Polar Vantage V3. But for now, thanks a lot for watching and see you next time.